Hey, everyone. It is Sleepy Reader, aka Damien. And today, or in this video, I have roped two of my friends into talking about Jack Kirby, my constant obsession. So today we're going to talk about the complete Jack Kirby run on Omac, which was only about 8 issues. So let me bring on my guests. We'll start with Matt, also known as Wednesday Serial.
Hello, Internet. How are you?
Hello, Matt. So it seems like lately you are back to reviewing comics. Am I right? Or
I'm
chatting about what you've read anyway.
I'm just doing the low effort stuff I've loved doing and just
Uh-huh.
enjoying it for what it is. And I
Mostly
think
Marvel and the Turtles, I think.
mostly Marvel and the Turtles. I try to talk other stuff, but that is the majority of
Uh-huh.
what I get on a month-to-month basis. I am widening my horizons, but it's not my monthly stack. So it's
So your
all.
videos are kind of on a monthly rotation these days?
I mostly just talk about what I get with the new stuff, but I've been considering trying to talk about some other things. But like, I've been reading a lot of Usagi, but what am I going to say about Usagi that hasn't been said a million times? I don't know. It's
Yeah,
good. Go read
Usagi's
it.
hard to talk about because it's just always good in about the same way.
Yeah, I think there's some stuff, but I don't know if you're familiar. It's right behind me. There's this Fantagraphics collection from the earliest stuff, and
I
it's
haven't read
in
that.
2 books. And I finished the first book, not the second book, and I'm thinking maybe with that amount, maybe I'll have enough to start talking about it. So yeah.
And this isn't the first time I've roped you into talking about 1970s Kirby. So
Far from it.
thanks for putting up with me yet again.
Oh no, it's an interesting DV. I actually put it to one of my friends to go check out some of the issues because that friend is into some very bizarre stuff, and I thought this
Uh-huh.
might be up their alley.
Yeah, the more you like bizarre science fiction, I think, the better.
Mhm.
Okay, and our third and just as important co-host is Eric from the Longbox Review podcast. Hey, Eric.
Hey, Longbox Review, aka Eric.
Yes, that's what I should have said, aka Eric.
There you go, aka
And
Podfather.
for those who don't listen to your podcast, it's a sort of multi-tentacled affair, right? With various different shows in the feed.
Started out as comic book focused, and like I said, hence the name Longbox Review, because that I would just get in my long boxes and review comics, right? Pretty basic. But then, yeah, I started branching out into other things and have a what I call my audio journal, The Gutters, and then I also have a Star Trek show because I love Star Trek
Right.
almost as much as I love comic books.
The Center Seat. And
Yes.
and an ongoing Legion of Superheroes show for Legion of Superhero fans should know about that.
That's right, with Peter Rios from the Daily Rios. Yeah, we get together and talk about the Volume 3 Legion of Superheroes, the beloved Baxter run. So yeah, that's always fun to do.
And in fact, this show was inspired by another side project or project you're doing with Chris. I can't remember his last name at the moment.
He did the Creator Talks podcast.
Yes, my favorite interview podcast.
Would post. Yeah, mine too. And he would post on his Instagram these older comics, Silver Age, Bronze Age stuff, mostly Silver Age. And then I happened to see that he posted something about some Kirby comics. I'm like, you know what? I've been reading comics now for 40 plus years, and I've read very little Kirby. And I thought, well, that'd be fun to get together with him. Yeah, get together with him and talk about some Kirby comics. So we did that. We talked about Omac #1. We talked about the Demon #1, and we talked about, oh my gosh, what was it? The third one that I'm blanking on right now. But we talked. Oh, Sandman.
You guys decided,
it was the Sandman.
Oh, Sandman. You guys decided not to continue with Omac. So then I thought, at least that's what I understood. So then I thought, hey, I would like to do a reread of Omac. Maybe I can suck Eric and Matt into it. Was there one you guys decided to continue reading together?
Well, I have a plan to expand to other of Kirby's titles at DC, and so
Okay.
eventually we're gonna talk about Commandy and New Gods and whatever. So
Right. Well, we are today talking about I'm really good at this. The 8 issues of Omac that Jack Kirby did starting in, I believe it was June of 1974. And the only successful title he had at that point was Commandy, and he had a contract to do 15 pages a week. So they started up Omac, and they got him on The Losers and something called Justice Incorporated. So it was kind of the less successful end of his run at DC. But I would say that Omac is a super soldier. So I jokingly called him Captain America 2.0. And he is powered by this computer in a satellite called Brother Eye that beams down energy at him. And he is controlled by, what are they called? The Global Peace something. Now I can't remember what they call themselves.
yeah, Global Peace Agency.
Global Peace Agency, who are very creepy. They always cover their faces with a spray so that you can't see what they look like.
Kind of like The Question.
I should make myself bigger. Kind of like The
Yes.
Question. You're right.
Yeah, good point, Matt.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there's some of the Global Peace Agency people. And so he is in each issue or each adventure sent off to fight some other danger that the Global Peace Agency has identified, and they just send him in, and he powers his way through and defeats the thing. And I think each issue maybe is Jack Kirby sort of throwing whatever ideas he has about the future up against the wall and having Commandy go in and fight it. Not Commandy, Omac. So I thought I would ask each of you for your general thoughts after reading these eight issues to start with. Are you up for going first, Matt?
Sure. So I just wanted to note one thing I noticed when I was reading through, and based on what you were talking about, it looks like this book came out, what's the term, bi-monthly, every other month?
Yes, every other month. You're right, bi-monthly.
Yeah. And I don't know, to me that was kind of interesting because I mean I read them all like in a night. So thinking like this was very much the era where having a little more breath between issues would actually do you some good, as opposed to needing to read all 6 issues at once because that's just one story. Right. Which was I say this every time we come back to Kirby or something, but it's something I constantly have to remind myself because I'm so geared for the more modern comics. And one thing that just hit me overall is how incredibly, even for back in the day or whatnot, how deeply weird these Omac comics are. And I thought I had a better understanding of what it would be because I think I flipped through the John Byrne stuff that came later, and I read some of the Dan Didio stuff. When New 52 came out, and so I thought I had like a picture of what this would be. And I was completely wrong. Each one of these issues is like an entire sci-fi movie's worth of ideas crammed into an issue with a general overarching plot with Omac and Kirby stuff as well on top. And it was just, it was an experience in and of itself. I don't know quite what else to put it. I did hear some stuff about the ending, and I know we'll get there, but it was, I don't know. It was a lot to take in, but it was fascinating and interesting, and I'm not sure I really absorbed as much as I should have.
That is understandable. This is probably my 4th or 5th read of the series.
Oh, really?
Yeah, over a long period of time. Because it even though it's so dense, it's kind of a quick read, I find. So when I return to it, I think I'm just going to read one issue, and then I just sort of read a bunch of them.
Even compared to Commandy or Fourth World or anything, this is very action-packed.
Right. And I read that after the Fourth World thing collapsed and DC didn't want him to do that anymore. They let him continue with Mr. Miracle, but they told him to simplify it and not put in all the complex plots. I think this Omac was just his response. Well, I shouldn't be the next one to talk, but I think it was his response to, oh, they just want something simple. But he couldn't keep it simple, but he gave it the spine of just nonstop action. So anyway, sorry, Eric, I would like to get your first reactions to your read through of all this. Is this the first time you read the whole series?
It is, yeah. So, like I said, when I was talking with Chris, I only read the first issue and then decided that I was going to read through all of the 3 series that we talked about, and decided to start with Omac because that was,
cool.
I think, our. Well, no, it wasn't my least favorite. Sandman kind of was, but Omac interested me in ways that Sandman didn't. So I started reading them, but I did not, unlike Matt, I did not read them like all at once. I read them over a period of weeks, and just every week or so I'd read a new one, and I was entertained. But the thing that I really got out of this, besides being exposed to some great Jack Kirby action oriented art, and that image there, Brother Eye, that those kind of vistas that he gives us, I love that stuff. And but the really interesting thing was all these fantastic ideas that Kirby had about the future, and what adversarial things we would encounter in that future. And so that's really where I was like, oh my God, there's some really interesting ideas and philosophical, quite frankly, ponderings going on here. And that's, I did not expect that from a Kirby comic. I'll be quite honest. So this was more of a joy to read than I anticipated.
Oh, well, I'm glad to hear that. Yeah, so I definitely have very mixed feelings about Omac, because I think it is one of his more sloppily written books. And I think it's weird because he is throwing all these very sophisticated ideas about as a futurist, right? Especially when you consider he actually started it 6 months before it was published. So it was 1973 when he was working his way through this stuff. And there's just so many kind of advanced science fiction ideas in here. But plot-wise, he kind of fell back on maybe what he was doing in the 1940s with mobsters named Mr. Big. And there was another one that was just like the dictator named Kafka. And so it was like he was putting a lot of effort into some aspects of it and not very much effort into others. And I was very sad with the last 2 stories where he has Dr. Scuba, which is kind of a silly James Bond kind of name or something. But there was something really interesting about Dr. Scuba, and that was where they canceled the book before he finished the story, and they just changed.
Did they cancel it?
They canceled it, and and he didn't know it was canceled. So at the last minute, they just added some extra panels, some extra captions to that last panel.
Oh, I thought this was like he had that book and then he went back to Marvel, and so the book just ended.
That's a good point. I mean, it is pretty close to the time he went back to Marvel, but I think he continued on a little bit longer than this, but they probably knew he was leaving.
Okay.
So because I read that the reason the last few Kirby books have Joe Kubert covers is they were thinking they didn't want their audience to think of these as Kirby books anymore, because they figured they were going to continue them with other artists. So they started doing other artists on the covers. So the last few Commandy books that Kirby did have Joe Kubert covers, and they did continue Commandy, but they canceled Omac. And well, it's a huge spoiler, so people who don't want spoilers, but it ends I mean, they hardly even try to change it, you know. Brother I is now helpless and silent in a prison of slag in the second to last panel. And then in the last panel, we see an explosion. And it just says, but below, the effort has caused an overload in Dr. Scuba's equipment. And the island explodes in a giant fireball, and his very success brings destruction to the evil Scuba. Is this the end? And that's the end of the story. So I don't think Kirby wrote that final bit there, or maybe they asked him to rewrite it. But it was meant to be a 3-part story. So anyway,
Well,
that's skipping way ahead. But
and I had read that they actually continued the story. I don't know in what way. If it was an actual conclusion to this.
They had a backup story about Omac, drawn. I'm not sure if it was written and drawn by Jim Starlin, which, and it appeared. I think it appeared at the back of a Commandy at one point, and then Commandy was canceled, and then it was appearing as a backup in Warlords.
Yes.
And to my knowledge, it hasn't been reprinted anywhere. So, and I haven't dug through my comic books to piece it together. So when I was a kid, I read random bits of it in the backs of comics, and I didn't know if there was a connection to the old story, because he looks completely different and his world was different. But it's been so long since I've read it, I can barely remember. Do either of you know anything about that version?
No, other than they appear, these backup stories appeared in those issues.
Yeah.
I in fact, I tried to seek them out. I was hoping that the Warlord issues would be on the DC app,
yeah, but they're
not.
Yet.
No,
yeah. They've been releasing Warlord issues, and they're still pretty early on the
yeah.
app.
If they continue with that pacing, it's going to be a while before they get to those issues.
Yeah, and fingers crossed that they include the backup stories.
Oh, that's true. Yes,
because you never know with these digital services.
Mm-hmm.
And then there were various reboots, like there's the John Byrne one that Matt mentioned. There was a thing involving Batman, where it was the Omac project, and there was and then there was a couple of others, I think, and then most recently there was the one with the Dan DiDio did that Matt also mentioned in New 52, where Omac is like the Hulk, and it's all about instead of the future, it's about Cadmus Laboratories and that sort of stuff.
There was also an issue of DC Comics Presents where Omac teamed up with Superman in 1983 that I read recently as well. And
did that seem like this Omac?
Not really. Yeah, there were similarities, but it was not. It was, in fact, he was barely even a guest star in the story, so it was really odd. But it lovingly drawn by George Perez. So
George Perez probably was happy to do a Kirby character. But I would have loved someone to pick up on this, but they would have had to be very creative, because every issue Kirby just creates 1,000 new things, and so I've noticed with older comics, maybe you guys have noticed this too, that often the hero is a traveler through some event or some interesting situation. And this was kind of that on steroids. Like Omac really doesn't change, but the situations change.
Yeah, definitely.
I would have
travels idea.
Right.
There was some, I forget which issue, I think it was the one with the train, kind of made me think of that idea in a bit of a different way, but like each one of these is a big action adventure sci-fi thing, and one of them in particular reminded me of, there's been a few movies about like some crazy thing going on a train. I was like, oh, this probably inspired all of those too. So
yeah, now that you mention it, Damien, this seems sort of like a proto Fugitive.
Yes. Well, and that was a standard kind of, like the show Kung Fu, where he wandered the land, and or just most, it was kind of a standard kind of way to tell stories, serialized stories back then, because you wanted a full story each issue, but you wanted a continuing character. Like the old Hulk TV show was like that.
Yeah.
There's that kind of cool train when you mentioned it. I wanted to find it.
Yeah. Yeah, the train didn't look like that in any of the movies or whatever I was thinking of.
Yeah, I doubt any movie would do a train looking like that. But the sad thing, I think, is that he does introduce kind of interesting aspects about Omac and the GPA, the global police, whatever they're called, that are very creepy and would be interesting if that evolved and Omac kind of explored that, like, who am I? What are they doing? What have they done to me? And what is the price of being the super soldier? And am I really fighting on the right side? And all of those kind of questions.
I saw some of that. I don't know if any of that really landed for me, because the idea that I don't know if I'm fighting on the right side, like, he gets orders from a satellite. That's about it. Like, he doesn't have any coworkers or anything.
Well, he gets
so it doesn't
orders for
even-
these faceless people too.
Yeah.
Is
But
it in this
I
issue
thought they were.
they give him a fake family?
Yeah, I was
That would
gonna
have been
mention
so
that.
cool to explore. You know,
Yeah, I think that's the only issue where we really get any kind of navel gazing from the character, and it's
Right.
so quick.
Yeah.
And it quickly moves to a different topic altogether. So,
Right.
but yeah, he ponders his former life that he can't remember,
Right.
as Omac, and then they delivered the parents, his test parents, they call them.
Yeah.
And the caption in there somewhere says, "What began as computer dating will flower into complete packaged living. Computers will pick ideal families and backgrounds for those who lack the total human relationship," which is, in this case, Omac.
Yeah. Oh, you can't really read that when I do that.
Which.
Yeah. So that's a really cool, creepy, dystopian kind of concept
that we're living in.
And there's well, yeah, we're like a computer date here.
I love
Our
you
computer
guys.
created a comic book family. But but I do think there's threaded in there some interesting things, because then when sorry, I'm kind of dominating this discussion. When we get to Dr. Scuba, he mentions, where are they? He mentions his daughter and his son-in-law, or the fiance of his daughter, are both people like Omac. They aren't who they seem. Somehow they have been changed through the same energy transformation that Omac has gone through. I guess we should say, I haven't said, in the original, Omac is originally a guy named Buddy Blank, who these GPA people just decide to turn into Omac. There's Buddy Blank, and he's kind of the schlub at the office who everyone picks on.
Or assaults.
Yeah. And then they go to their room where they assault dummies and stuff. But so he has lost his identity, and then Dr. Scuba's associates have lost their identities too, apparently. So I feel like if there had been enough time, and maybe if Kirby were the type of person who would go back to what he had started, which I don't know if he was, there was a lot to explore there. So,
Well, and I was thinking, like, is Buddy Blank actually his name, or is that just what they have on record now? And then we might discover more, and with that we might get a full name. Because
right, someone named Buddy Blank, is he himself some kind of creation ahead of time that they've planted, because someday in the future they plan to turn him into Omac?
Or yeah.
Why
that's
does
a great idea.
Omac?
Yeah. Well, and also the series is bookended by Buddy,
right?
And issue 1 and the final issue. So, or
in the final issue, we're left with Omac is Buddy again. Sorry, it takes a minute for these pages to load. Omac is Buddy again. There he is, and he's trapped with Dr. Scuba. He doesn't understand what's going on at all.
Mhm.
So there was definitely, it seemed like Kirby was coming back to some of this stuff. If he'd been able to continue, he might have explored it more.
Yeah. Yeah, that
Yeah.
was that whole idea of Buddy and Omac and identity.
Right.
What they're that they were they were just he was just getting into that just a tiny little bit, and that was one of those unfortunately one of those dropped threads, either via cancellation or his own, well, I guess maybe even editorial's idea of what makes a good Kirby comic for some reason.
Right.
And just didn't get into it. And this seemed like, I think you said this before, Damien, or getting into this. It just seems like this was a response to, hey, Jack, you're really great and you got all these great ideas, but what the kids really like is action. Can you give
Right.
us a little bit more of that? And he gave us that in spades in this book.
Yes. Yes.
But the artistry of the man is that he was able to also weave in all these other little things, maybe too much, but here we are now, 40 years later, talking about this series and what interesting ideas, potential it had. So
Right.
I got to commend the guy for that.
Yeah.
Well,
Uh,
I do agree with a bit too much whatnot, but I mean, also if I compare this to like Fourth World, I found this far more readable than that stuff because I
mm,
mean, it was so action packed and it was fast, and there was some asides, but blink and you miss it. If you don't really care, you can kind of just gloss over it, and so it, I think, worked on a level. But I think if you come back to it and slow down, there's a lot here that they could explore.
right.
Like DC's made bones with the Fourth World sense, so. I definitely think there's stuff here that they could tie in with all that. I'm actually kind of surprised Omac isn't a kind of
Yeah.
DC character that floats around more.
It's a missed opportunity, but for whatever reason, creators have decided to just take the name Omac and do something different with it. That
Mhm.
seems to have been what happened.
And tie it in
But
with Batman. Why not?
yeah, why not? But
Well,
I
if
think
if
it would
if
be,
if you're going to launch a concept that maybe you might look at it as unsuccessful, who better to tie it to than Batman?
right.
From DC's perspective, I mean.
Yes, no, that's
Superman?
very
It
true.
just makes so much more sense to tie this
I,
stuff to Superman.
yeah.
But from the very first issue, there are threaded through like questions of what is human.
Mhm.
And they're just, they kind of drive me crazy. They're just lingering there. In the first issue, we have, these lifelike decoys, like like from Sergeant Fury. I mean, Nick
Build a
Fury,
friends.
right? And they seem, the Build-A-Friend is much nicer to Buddy Blank than any human being in the story, but she is also a human or a robotic bomb, so he has to destroy her in the end. And
Well, but since you're talking about that, what a great dichotomy though, because as you said, the Build a Friend, Lila, I think her name was,
yes, Lila,
um, she is the most human in the way that she interacts with Buddy as compared to everybody else. And yet when he becomes Omac,
right,
he is regrettable, as you can, I don't know if people can read that on the screen, but he is regretting what he has to do. But it is very much, he knows, or he's, I don't know if maybe he's being commanded and he doesn't realize it. Uh it's not on the text or in the text, but so I'm extrapolating a little bit, but he is determined to destroy it all because it is bad. He is determined,
right.
or has been told, that it is bad technology. So
The structure of the story and the way Omac behaves, you would think it's like Steve Ditko's Black and White World.
mm,
There's bad guys and good guys, but somewhere under there is a lot of question marks.
yeah.
Well, and when we get to some of the weirder ideas, I actually thought it was very reminiscent of some of Steve Ditko's sci-fi stuff in a way that other Kirby sci-fi stuff isn't. And to what you were saying earlier, the build a friend stuff, and then also the old rich people sucking the youth out of the poor young
Right.
people one. I forget the device name that. And some of that other stuff was very reminiscent is the wrong word, but reminded me of Transmetropolitan with some of the early issues as well, just dealing with the transhumanism and all that, and kind of realizing like that comic gets a lot of credit for being, you know, ahead of the time in sci-fi and like this very
Right.
early cyberpunk idea, but like this is a bit earlier
Yeah.
and touches on a lot of the same stuff, and it's just kind of crazy.
Well, Transmetropolitan, I think, is the closest to this in terms of ideas per page, but it's a much more sophisticated narrative, and had a lot more time to explore the issues that it raised.
I take issue with a comic that has a bowel blaster being described as sophisticated, but I know what you.
I guess I got these out of order, but I just love this idea of the city that the super rich can buy for a night. And let's see what there's
Another hellhole we're living in. Yeah.
Well, Matt, so you've mentioned that a couple times now. So you know, the cover, well, a lot of the covers here, you know, the world that's coming is the declaration of this series, and you know, the response is Omac, the one-man army corps, to deal with the world that's coming. So, what is it about? What's your I guess what's your response to what you read here from 1974 or 75 to what we're experiencing now? You know, what are the parallels here that you're seeing?
Well, I mean, like the idea of the rich like renting out large swaths of land and doing things like that. I mean, it's not one to one like renting out New York City or something, right? But I mean, there's certainly the rich who own their islands or whatnot. But I mean, there are definitely a lower class of more visible rich like renting out islands or large swaths of land to do things, or something kind of akin to that with like Burning Man or something that, you know, is a sidestep, but similar to that idea that becomes wrought in different ways.
Or you read about, you know, that like less than 0.01% of the super rich, you know, of the income in the world, who are doing more of the, you know, affecting global warming percentage wise, you know, on a huge level because of their super yachts and other things that just suck up so much of the resources and energy and pollute the air so much more than the rest of us are doing. Not that any of us are, or almost any of us are trying to do any better, but well, the hugeness of the rich's resources feels like it's gotten more sort of extravagant, more crazy over time.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's just a lot of little things in here, but I mean, just even take a step back from that. Like, I think there is a lot of stuff in here about like maybe the super rich and how they go about it, or when we get to Dr. Scuba and some of his world-ending plans, like that is a bit super spy, like you were saying. But I also felt like this was touching on some social conscious stuff that was, you know, maybe looking forward for the day in the 70s, but also you could probably tie it to something going on roughly around the time, or some event that Kirby had in his head at the time.
That's what I was wondering about. Yeah. What was going on in the 70s, you know, the early 70s, that corresponds to, or is this is a reaction to that, you know, because but at the same time, you know, it's also he appears to be a futurist in some ways, because a lot of this stuff has come true to a, you know, to a degree, like you were saying. So it's just that kind of stuff just is fascinating to me.
I agree, and I think it's something we see in fiction again. I mean, to reach the Transmetropolitan again, since we made the connection, I mean, there is a lot in there that does feel like futurist. Like a lot of people were pointing to it when the Trump presidency came up and how the media and all that went through, and that's really what that comic examined. But also, if you know Transmetropolitan was pointing to and the Hunter S. Thompson connection, you understand where the inspiration came for that when it was written and whatnot. And so, I mean, it's those cyclical natures of history coming through, and then we see that echoed in our science fiction and whatnot. And wow, that lady is stacked.
What, Power Girl?
Yeah, basically,
right
right?
here.
Yeah. She doesn't wear orange though.
So, what was I going to say? The other thing that I notice a lot as I reread Kirby in recent years, and I know more about his life now, I see, like, even in Commandy and here, reflections of his trauma going through World War II. He never directly refers to, I mean, well, I haven't read his war comics yet because he did The Losers. I want to read that next. But he never is directly saying this is about my life as a soldier. But there's something about Omac and what he's going through may be what the army turns you into to make you into a good soldier. And
Yeah.
you know, he was sent as a scout behind enemy lines in France, you know, as the Allies were moving through France. And that kind of feeling of being the person that's just sent out there to take all the risks, while some faceless bureaucrats, you know, make the plans for what you have to do. I think World War II is the major shaper of most of his famous comics, other than, ironically, Captain America, which came before World War II. But
and that reshaped Captain America, obviously,
right,
and
when he came back to
Superman.
Captain America, yeah.
I mean, comics post World War II were just affected by World War II, basically up through the 70s or 80s,
right,
depending on how you look at it. And you still see those echoes today, because I mean, with any comics history comes echoes of World War II, even in like Flaming Carrot or whatever.
But
so
Kirby, much more, a lot of people, you know, like Stan Lee and Will Eisner, ended up getting jobs working on army newspapers and stuff. And Kirby was on the front lines and going past the front lines, having to go out and do morally questionable things, which I've seen him mention, you know, that he had a horrible, I've seen somewhere where he makes a passing reference to it, you know, horrible situations that you encounter in a country that's a war zone. And I think, yeah, I see that a lot in a recent reread I did in Commandy, but I also, in a different way, see that here with Omac.
In what ways? Because I don't see that playing out here. Because Omac he's doing a mission, but he doesn't contemplate the mission. He just does the mission. And I think Kirby has gone out of his way with the Global Peace Agency to make them likable is probably too strong of a term, but they're not the cigar chomping, you know, 5-star general stereotype either. That doesn't care about the troops on the ground.
So he's kind of twisted it a bit, because they are apparent, you know, they won't kill people. They do peaceful approaches, but in a sense, they make him do the dirty work while they retain the higher moral ground. And in the process, they've stolen away his identity. And I haven't been through basic training and what you have to do to become a soldier to go actually fight and kill people. But I'm guessing that you might feel like your identity was taken away from you, and your humanity was taken away from you to make you do this job.
Now, see, that would work so much better if Buddy Blank was not such a
Shamil.
Well, that's unfair.
Kind
because,
of a non-character.
He's
That's true.
The name is too on the nose, but and plus we don't get a whole lot with him. We feel sorry.
Right.
We feel sorry for him at first, and he kind of stumbles. Well, not he doesn't stumble at all. He's chosen to take on this role, this task. But that's the problem with this series as a whole, I think, is that nothing plays out to any kind
a
of
lot of it's not fleshed out. And I'm not saying that Kirby knew he was reflecting these aspects from his
I don't think I think that's
but
true.
I think he was. And I think Commandy is a much better reflection of some of that. Commandy has a lot of personality, but if you read, I didn't notice this as a kid, or even maybe rereading it 20 years ago, but when I reread it this year, and sorry for going off onto Commandy, but he goes from war zone to war zone to war zone, and he never knows what situation he's going to get himself into next.
Yeah, that makes a lot more sense.
Sorry, I've been sitting on a question. I kind of want to get it in before we move too far from it. Are there any other major comic luminaries that were vets of World War II?
I mean, there's plenty of them that were drafted and had roles that I have heard about, like Eisner and Stan Lee. So I don't know.
Yeah,
if
maybe
others
vet's the
were,
wrong word. Like
if
on the
others were
lines.
grunts in combat.
Yeah.
I think Jim Starlin and perhaps Mike Grell were both in combat in Vietnam.
Okay.
And maybe some others. I think Steve Englehart was briefly in the Army and then became a conscientious objector.
Okay. Sorry, just a quick aside that just piqued my interest, and I figured you guys might know. The other thing I was going to say is something that was through my mind while reading through these is I've also been reading very early Fantastic Four lately, off and on. And I couldn't help but kind of compare and contrast like what Kirby's doing here with this and what I know Kirby to be doing versus what's the Fantastic Four, which is Stan and Jack.
Right.
And kind of seeing like Kirby's great, but he does get so wrapped up in his ideas and the forward momentum and whatnot. And it seems like his best works come when there's kind of a pull from someone else to anchor it back to some character and maybe a bit more narrative and whatnot. Like, he's probably one of the few comic creators where they're like, you need to slow down.
Yeah. No, it would have been great when he was at DC if he had a co-writer who he trusted, but he had such a bad experience with Stan Lee. He was like, no, there's no way. I'm not letting anyone interfere with me. And that is why everything he did at DC is like a masterpiece potentially, but it all falls apart and they get canceled before he gets to even finish them, except for Commandy.
Yeah, I'm still trying to figure out what Stan Lee did that was so bad. Not saying that it was great, but I mean, based on everything I understand of like editors and everything else in comics in the day, it seems like Stan Lee may have not been great, but was a cut above the average at least. So I just that's something that as I keep coming back and forth on that and that push and pull, I don't know.
Well, Stan Lee took all the credit.
He got better as he went. I get it.
Well, way
and I understand,
after,
but he did get better as he went.
At the time that Kirby left.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
And Marvel was becoming famous. Stan Lee was getting on TV in news stories, and Jack was feeling like a chump. Stan was taking the Silver Surfer and saying, hey, that's mine. I'm not even going to let Jack draw it when I do a Silver Surfer series. And he was changing Jack's idea of the Silver Surfer. So Jack was he was creating all this stuff. Stan was taking credit for it and warping it in ways that Jack didn't like.
I mean, I hear what you're saying, and you're not wrong. But also, when Jack originally came to Marvel, were there even credits for artists and whatnot in the books outside of Marvel?
I agree with you on that. Stan Lee is a two-edged sword.
Yeah,
but I'm just saying why Kirby refused to work with anyone else after Stan Lee.
We talked about Jack Kirby. We had to get to the controversy, and we can come back.
I agree with you. It's more nuanced. But what I'm saying is, Jack Kirby was so angry. There's no way he would work with a co-writer at that point. But it would have been good if he did.
Hey, Ditko did the same thing. There was something there. I don't know. But also, everything I've read about Ditko makes me think he'd be impossible to work with anyways.
Genius is not easy, right?
That's a strong word, especially for that man.
For Ditko.
Well, would you call Kirby a genius?
Yeah, Kirby is a creative genius, unlike any. Yeah. I think he might be the greatest American artist, period. Personally, I just throwing around major declarations, but like, no, Kirby, no question about genius. Ditko,
maybe he was just very good.
Did you read any of the later Ditko stuff, like from right before his death and whatnot?
I did. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's just crazy
It's
man stuff.
he basically stopped being creative in the 1950s and just kept going and just kept doing the same thing.
So
Hmm.
Matt may have heard me say this before. I think there's two kinds of geniuses. There's the, at least in creative arts kind of things, there's the initial creator genius who just has fantastic ideas and initiates new things, in the case of Kirby, all the time. And there's the refining genius, and I would say that Alan Moore would be the refining genius. And most people, you know, who are creatively very successful are more likely the refiners. But so, like, if you look at science fiction, which you might be more familiar with, Eric, you know, someone like Doc Smith and Isaac Asimov and people like that, they weren't great writers, but they initiated a lot of stuff. And I feel like there's a genius there. And I feel like that's the kind of genius Kirby is. He's not refined, but he has this raw genius.
Well,
that's exciting.
To that too, and to get to maybe another angle on this comic, Omac's design, you know, if you take the title, if you handed that to basically any other artist, no one would have landed on this design. I was curious what you guys thought, because I'm looking at Omac and I'm like, where's the one-man army? This guy has an eye on his chest and a Joy-Con on his belt buckle.
Right.
Well, I was going to say
it's
Perez, but I think Perez was inspired by a lot of Kirby design sense, right? Because you know, Perez would you know, well, just look at the Anti-Monitor in Crisis, right? You know, it's just he comes up with these weird designs, and I could see a definite through line from Kirby to Perez there.
Yeah, Perez eventually developed completely his own style, but if you look at the early stuff, it's very Kirby inspired. And like you say, a lot of his designs are still, even when he had his own voice, were still very Kirby inspired, I think. But I do think, all I can think is that with the mohawk, that he thought that looked like the Greek helmet, you know, of warriors.
That's what I thought of too.
And the eye on his chest, I guess, is Brother Eye.
I was not thinking Roman at all. I was like, what's the Native American connection here?
Yeah.
I don't even get
Maybe
it.
It could have been Native American, but I think
no, I think you're right. I think that Roman helmet makes infinitely
and somewhere in one of these stories they refer to Ares, the god of war. So I think the weird thing is, though, I keep looking at him now and keep thinking he looks like Elvis. Like middle-aged Elvis with the big sideburns. And somehow instead of the duck, what do you call it, the pompadour, it's somehow morphed into a mohawk. But
well, those are two ideas I would never have put together, Damien. So that's cool.
Because I was reading it digitally this time, so I was zooming in on panels, and certain panels I said, that's Elvis.
Well, since Matt brought up the design of Omac, you know, you flashed on the screen, I forget which issue it was, but we got that monster that the Kafka
one that's like a bacteria
general,
or something.
Yeah. So we got, we get things like that.
Oops, I said that one, but it's not on the screen anymore. I apologize.
But you know, there are other things like that too. Yeah, exactly, that thing. You know, there's you know, the train. We showed the train earlier that you guys were talking about, and you know, just a lot of there's a lot of fun design stuff. But that's, you know, that's Kirby though. So it's just a lot of fun to see those kind of things. I just, again, you know, my biggest regret about this series is that we didn't get any kind of characterization.
Right. I mean, I almost wish like George Perez and Marv Wolfman had continued the story and like started exploring all the nooks and crannies of this world and the characters and things, but it's never going to happen.
Well,
Or
not with them now.
you mentioned the
or no one.
you mentioned the yeah you mentioned the Dan DiDio Omac that was drawn by Giffen,
Keith
if I
Giffen.
recall.
Yes, and the art in that was quite
And
nice, actually.
yeah, and so if you let Giffen do it, I think just
True.
Giffen, write and
Yeah,
draw,
without
you're
DiDio.
gonna get some really cool things.
What has Giffen written before?
He usually
He's did
co-writes.
something.
He was a
Yeah.
co-writer on Omac.
Okay.
I think he
Oh,
usually
really?
co-writes.
Yeah. Well,
Didn't he do some-
he was Legion, the 5 years later Legion. He was writing or plotting that.
Oh, what was he the full writer on that? Maybe.
Well, no, he was the idea guy, and then he had a couple writers that would do the scripts essentially.
That's what Kirby needed.
Yeah.
Right. I think Kirby needed a collaborator that he was willing to let slow him down and say, let's explore this next issue and not go on to the next idea quite yet. But there's the Giffen stuff. Yeah, the art was very good,
like Kirby. So
yeah, and Giffen more recently has gone back to his kind of pseudo Kirby style. I've noticed in a lot of comics he's done, like when he did the what are they called, the Pitiful Five or whatever they're called.
Inferior Five, yeah,
Inferior Five. It was similar art to this.
Wasn't that also written by Dan DiDio? I don't remember.
No, I thought it was written by D. Matthias and Giffen or something like that.
Oh, okay.
I might be wrong.
Yeah, I think those two did. Didn't they also do like JLI?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
They tend towards comedy when the two of them write together.
Yeah.
I think my ultimate reaction to Omac is I want to go in and rewrite it. I want to steal all these great ideas, and I want to add characterization and more exploration of the philosophical themes.
Well, maybe if you just rearrange the panels and then rewrite the bubbles.
There you go. Yeah. And I can sell it to the really hip alternative comics crowd as a remix.
I think you get sued if you do that.
I think it's
to your point, though. They, I'm aware of other people taking public domain comics and concepts and characters and then doing exactly what you guys were describing. It's just too bad that DC
where they changed the dialogue.
Yeah. DC's not going to let a Kirby concept go because so.
I could write and draw my own character who anyone who actually reads it would see I stole everything from Omac and just use different names. And I don't think, I think legally I would be okay as long as they decide not to sue me because I couldn't afford the lawyer to fight Warner Brothers. But
you just need a meaningfully distinct thing. So make his mohawk red, put a little lightning bolt on his forehead, and I don't know, block out the eye, and you should be good.
Sister Ear will be his satellite companion.
If Michelle Fief can do it with
Capra.
Yeah, exactly. Why can't you?
Right. Yeah, I could do something like Capra. I just have to get a lot better as an artist, I guess.
Don't we all?
Well, I don't know.
I tried drawing the foot the other day. Oh my gosh.
You tried drawing the foot or a foot?
No, just a foot, like, a human foot. Then I tried a horse hoof, and that seemed a little more doable, but that didn't come together either.
It makes me wonder, without Stan Lee or someone like Stan Lee, could Jack Kirby even maintain a comic book beyond 40 issues or something? That's how long he lasted on Commandy. And I don't think anything else was longer than Commandy. And everything else he did as a solo work was usually under 20 issues.
What did he do when he went back to Marvel?
He did Captain America. He might have lasted pretty long on that. Eternals was 11 issues, I think.
Okay.
Machine Man was probably around that many issues. Devil Dinosaur was probably 6 or 7 issues.
Yeah, I was like, that was much.
There were some other things in there. I can't remember now. He
Hmm.
did this really weird anthology series based on 2001, which I guess turned into Machine Man.
Right. Yeah.
But, you know, people will say, oh, well, the Fantastic Four was really just the Challengers of the Unknown. But the Challengers of the Unknown did not become a huge hit and create a whole new universe. And the Fantastic Four did. There was something, even if Jack Kirby did 70% of the work, there was something in the part that Stan Lee put in that made it all kind of have a lasting effect.
Yeah.
Well, if I
Yeah,
may,
some
I mean,
alchemical magic.
Right.
yeah. Well, and I think beyond that, I think there's something to when I listen to Longbox Review or the Sleepy Reader channel
Right.
or I don't know, Wednesday Serial something. Um there's a focus on what's in the comic beyond just some superficial ideas. Because when I hear those comparisons, are like Doom Patrol is basically just the X-Men. It was some weird freaks. There's a guy in a mansion with a wheelchair leading it. It's these kind of superficial things. People are like, oh, this is basically this based on these like three basic, mostly physical characteristics. It's
Right.
like, what makes a story? What makes the art? What makes these things come together? Or what makes issue 3 sell and not just issue 1 is more of the magic of why we care about comics. And I have a
I agree
house with a
completely.
bunch of dead paper. Um, More so than, oh man, this guy in a wheelchair is leading these people. Isn't that cool? Like, okay, but like, what else is in there? What's the
Right.
story? What's the ethos? What's the idea? And I mean, to maybe pull it back, I mean, that's kind of what I think is interesting about Omac is there's a lot of stuff in there that feels like it could be pulled to that level of comic, but I mean, within these 8 issues, it seems like you need about 3 issues per issue to kind of tell that kind of story, which was
Right.
not the method mode now. But now we get 6 per, and then that's too far the other way.
Yeah. Well, and to bring it back to what you're saying about Omac, it is a weird experience reading this because it is both bad and brilliant in various parts.
Yeah.
Which okay, so where's the balance for you for those two ideas? Which one outweighs the other?
If it didn't have Kirby art, I wouldn't have reread it so many times. But
we would be
the
talking
Kirby
about it.
art allows me to go back and read and say, hey, there's a really cool idea. There's a really cool scene. Because I'm not satisfied by the overall effect.
Yeah.
What if it was drawn by Alex Ross?
Could Alex Ross do this?
Oh, did you not read the
I read his
circle
Fantastic
Four thing?
That was kind of cool, but he's missing something as a writer too.
Okay.
I felt incomplete reading that. It's hard to put my finger on why.
That's how I feel about his work too. Yeah.
There was a lot of cool stuff in there, and of course it was an homage to Kirby and Lee anyway.
I just realized the stuff I was thinking about was written by other people. Yeah. Yeah.
But the Full Circle, the Fantastic Four Full Circle, he wrote that, and it wasn't bad.
I thought that was great personally. I thought it did a lot and was playing on the right notes. But
no, it wasn't bad at all. But I don't. Yeah.
It wasn't a masterpiece.
And I don't think he is. I don't think he creates new things.
No.
So he could redo Omac. That would be cool if he redid Omac, and maybe he and a writing partner sort of filled in a little bit more of the philosophical stuff going on.
Maybe. I would almost rather see him just redraw Omac.
And not even no rewriting at all.
Yeah, or maybe tweak the writing to fit how he's re-angling things or whatever. But
he's got to do a lot more than just that though to make this engaging. I would not want to read
this year.
Yeah, I would not want to read an Alex Ross verbatim redrawing of Omac without any kind of editing, tweaking, making the narrative better, making the characterizations better. as much as I love Alex Ross, it's just, we already have Kirby. We don't need somebody
Right.
else redoing that.
I've just had this pet idea of like, I'd love to see, these big artists take on comics that, especially ones that maybe weren't rendered as well, but
I
are the
had
more
that
classic
pet idea
comics.
until they've done that, but they've done it in a bad way. There's several Marvel books that they had a different artist redraw each page,
Yeah, not that.
like
That's
Giant
that's
Size X-Men they did it with, and
that's always a
Steve
bad
Rogers,
idea.
I think, and
You
it
can't
was
go from artist to artist, page to page. You need to have an artist redo a comic. You can't
I felt
do a
like I
new
was
art style every
watching each
page.
What?
artist do it worse than Jack Kirby had already done. It's like it's like watching dominoes fall, artist after artist proving they can't top Kirby.
To your point, Matt, I think that's full circle. What you're asking for is what full circle is. That is
Yeah, kind of.
him basically doing a sequel to that, Fantastic 451? No, not 51.
Somewhere
Whatever it
around
is.
there, yeah.
Somewhere
The
around there,
This
yeah.
Man, This
Yeah.
Monster. It was a sequel to This Man,
Yeah.
This Monster.
Well, yeah, but a sequel. I'm talking about literally like, you wouldn't want to do it with This Man, This Monster. That's a classic. But
Yeah.
yeah, I know, but it's basically that though. It is basically doing that story.
Yeah.
I think the thing is, I mean, with at least the comics that we're talking about here with Stan Lee or Jack Kirby on his own, there's an integration of art and writing, and you can't just, if you're an artist who just goes in and redraws it, you're not meshed into the story, because when Kirby's doing it himself, he's creating and he's drawing and writing at the same time. Like the two are the same process for him. And with Stan Lee and Jack Kirby, they may or may not have discussed it a little bit, but there's an interaction between their creativity that is meshed together again. So if you go back and you just take the Stan Lee dialogue, and you're just the artist is no longer the artist, is just an illustrator then.
That's something I heard from Claremont in an interview, because obviously he was back in the Marvel office in his heyday,
Right.
and he has since done more modern things up till
And doesn't he much
recently.
prefer the old Marvel method?
Well, what he was saying is, like, you were in an office, you were creating, you were collaborating, you're doing all this crazy stuff, and you're feeding off the energy of the day and all this stuff going on. And now you write a script and you ship it to someone in Brazil or whatever, and you get the pages back. Maybe you put in some notes, maybe you can't. You work with the editor, but like, it's this very detached clinical process where like the art and the authorship are far more separated, because you can't peek over the artist's shoulder and be like, oh, what about this, or like, what angle are you thinking about here, or like have that more immediate.
And even I think if the artist isn't in Brazil, I think in general they now want the editor to be between the artist and writer and controlling the overall ship. Whereas
it depends on the book,
at least in interviews I've heard with Claremont, he complains that back then the editor trusted you, and now every script you write is this huge editorial process.
And that might be what Claremont's running into now. But I mean, I also know it's not as modern anymore, but like the Snyder Capullo relationship was more direct between the two of them. So
that's true. And that's why it became good, I think.
I think it started better and got worse.
Well, the first arc, but the first 12 issues were better than what came later, I would say. But anyway, that's a matter of taste. Well, I really appreciate you guys being willing to dive back into this old stuff. You don't have my nostalgia for it, which also helps me get through the rough patches. So I appreciate you reading it with open minds and finding what is good and what is bad in it. Did either of you have any thoughts you haven't had a chance to express about this material?
We covered it. Like I said, there were the thing that really connected with me reading this was those kind of sci-fi ideas and Kirby's reaction to those, to whatever fueled the result that is Omac. But it's just I wish we could have got more, and not just more issues, but just more delving into what these things mean and what his what was his purpose in exploring those ideas. And so that would have been really cool to get more of that out of this. But like I said, it was just very enjoyable to read, just to get the ideas, the bajillion ideas per issue, and to see the wonderful Kirby art. So some of those splash pages that you threw up there earlier, those just great to look at. If nothing else, it's great to look at.
Eric, did you have a favorite sci-fi idea throughout this?
Let's see here. Well, when it got to the last two issues with the stealing the water in the way that they did, compressing the water into a rectangular shape that weighed tons, but to do it to blackmail, that kind of like I forget which one of you said it, but that kind of like that super spy James Bond type thing. But just the idea of tying this sci-fi, magic of reducing a lake into a cube, essentially, and then the whole restructuring, the what is it, the surgery, the electronic surgery or whatever, that kind of stuff that played into the end of the series as well as the beginning. That's just really cool things. But then also the sociological aspects of it, like if they, like I said, if Scuba was going to blackmail people, and here we are, to go back to your point, Matt, earlier, here we are in the 21st century, and water, some people are saying that, the next wars are not going to be about, borders or whatnot. It's going to be about water and food and, basic resources. And what is that going to mean for us, in the next, in the world that's coming for us? So,
right.
Was there ideas that jumped out to you, Matt, to turn your question on yourself?
My favorite one was probably the first one, the friend in a box.
Yeah,
I just found it really compelling because, I mean, anyone else, especially now, would just go straight to the sex doll thing. And there's elements of that in there. But he also played this, like, friend, and, like, people are lonely, but more like they probably need someone to talk to. And, like, it was a little more human and a little less lurid. And for that, it was more compelling and, like, just opened the possibility box for me a lot more than just what it would normally be put to. And I thought it was really interesting, but it was also at the same time, a few of those scenes were maybe the most, like, sex positive I've seen out of anything Kirby before. So it was kind of interesting to see that.
Yeah, I feel like that first issue, in a weird action superhero comic way, was very Philip K. Dick. At a time when Philip K. Dick was yet to be famous, although he'd written a lot of novels. But yeah, those friend in a box and the way that corporation was run and stuff, it all made me think of a Philip K. Dick novel. Although none of the other elements are at all like Philip K. Dick. I think my favorite was the fake parents and the renting a city for the night by the super rich. But there were lots of other cool stuff in there.
Did that remind you of, like, Escape from LA or anything like that?
It did. Yeah. Escape from New York. I don't know if I saw Escape from LA. But yeah.
They're the same movie in my mind.
Probably the same plot done twice.
Which is funny because there's inspiration for that, but those movies were a major inspiration on one of my favorite video game series too. So I'm, like, drawing all these weird connections as I go through.
Did that inspire Mario Kart? No.
Uh-huh.
That's the only video game I played recently.
Metal Gear.
Okay. Interesting. Well, thank you guys for joining me, and maybe we can do it again another time.
Yeah, read something way different.
Yeah. If one of you have a suggestion, we can do it on my channel or on one of yours.
I do.
People should check out, if anyone's still listening, check out Longbox Review. There is also not only is there a podcast, but you can listen to the podcast on YouTube. So I'll link both in the notes below, and I will link Matt's channel, which you should all listen to. And if Matt and I ever finish our planetary thing, which is 100% my fault.
Yeah, let's do that. I just have to remember where we were.
Well, I still have 2 unedited episodes that I have to edit, and when I get to the end of them, I could tell you where we were.
What?
I'm telling you,
making me wait
we
this
just
long?
need to. We just need to do it like this. We just talk with the cameras and everything. Then you don't edit it and just put it up because no one cares.
Well, that's true. No one cares. I got the editing caused me to freeze up, so I didn't.
Yeah, editing sucks.
And I just stopped, and I seem to have less energy than I used to, and I just don't want to late at night sit around editing. But it pained me to put out the podcast without editing it.
Yeah,
so
I understand that for sure.
That was 4 years ago.
Really? Oh, it was probably pre-COVID. That's for sure.
I still had my other podcast going at that point. Jeez.
Well, your other podcast died before ours did.
Yeah, well, yeah.
See, the lesson here is you both need to get back to it.
How about we do it as guests on your show, and then you can edit it?
Yeah, that's a big no.
So just so
you'll have
so
so
you
much
know,
more content.
Planetary from the Never Stay Dead podcast, which I quite enjoyed. Your last Planetary episode was February of 2022.
Oh, so not as long as you said.
That's when you put it out, not when we recorded.
Yeah.
But it is a bit of a crime that there were 4 more issues. We discovered 2 more conversations that I have never put out. So I've committed podcast crime. There should be a word for it.
You're going to podcast jail, Damien. I'm
going to podcast jail.
Harry Potty. I don't.